Rohan was a young man with a heart full of dreams and a smile that could brighten even the gloomiest day. He was just 1 week away from marrying the love of his life, Priya. Their love story was the kind people talked about for years, a tale of two souls who found each other against all odds. They had met in college, where Rohan's quiet charm and Priya's infectious laughter had drawn them together. Over the years, their bond grew stronger, and their love became the foundation of their lives. The wedding preparations were in full swing. The venue was decorated, the invitations had been sent, and the air was filled with excitement and joy. Priya spent her days imagining their future, a cozy home, laughter-filled evenings, and maybe even a little family of their own. Rohan, on the other hand, was busy ensuring everything was perfect for their big day. He wanted nothing less than a fairy tale wedding for his Priya. But fate had other plans. One evening, as Rohan was driving back home after meeting Priya, a sudden heavy rainstorm hit the city. The roads turned slippery, and the visibility dropped to almost zero. Rohan, careful as he was, tried to navigate through the storm. But as he approached a sharp turn, his car skidded out of control. The last thing he remembered was the sound of screeching tires and the blinding flash of headlights before everything went black. The crash was horrifying. Rohan's car slammed into a tree with a deafening thud, the impact shattering the windshield and crumpling the front of the vehicle. Passers-by, startled by the noise, rushed to the scene. One man dialed emergency services while others tried to pull Rohan out of the wreckage. He was unconscious, his face pale and blood trickling down his forehead. The rain poured relentlessly, mixing with the blood on the road, as the sirens of an ambulance grew louder in the distance. Priya, who had been waiting for Rohan to call her after he reached home, felt a strange unease settle in her chest. She tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Her heart raced as she dialed again and again, but there was no answer. Just as she was about to call his parents, her phone rang. It was Rohan's best friend Arjun, and his voice was trembling. "Priya, there's been an accident. Rohan, he's hurt. They're taking him to the hospital." Priya's world came crashing down. She grabbed her bag and ran out of the house, her mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. How could this happen? Just hours ago they were laughing together, planning their honeymoon, dreaming about their future. Now Rohan was fighting for his life. At the hospital, the scene was chaotic. Doctors and nurses rushed Rohan into the emergency room, his body limp and lifeless. Priya arrived, her clothes soaked from the rain, her face streaked with tears. She begged the doctors to let her see him, but they told her to wait. Rohan's family arrived soon after, their faces pale with shock. His mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably while his father tried to stay strong, though his hands trembled. Priya sat in a corner, clutching Rohan's jacket that he had left at her place the day before. She could still smell his cologne on it, and the scent made her cry even harder. Hours passed, and the waiting felt like an eternity. Finally, a doctor emerged, his face grim. "We've done everything we can," he said. "The next 24 hours are critical. If he makes it through, there's hope, but you need to prepare for the worst." Priya's heart shattered into a million pieces. She couldn't lose him. Not now. Not when they were so close to forever. The hospital room was eerily quiet, save for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Rohan lay motionless, his face pale and his body connected to a web of tubes and machines. Priya sat by his side, holding his hand tightly, as if her grip could somehow keep him from slipping away. She whispered to him, her voice trembling with emotion. "Rohan, please. You have to fight. We're so close to our dream. You promised me forever, remember? Don't you dare break that promise." Tears streamed down her face as she recalled their last conversation. They had been talking about their honeymoon, a trip to the mountains that Rohan had planned as a surprise. He had been so excited, his eyes sparkling as he described the cozy cabin and the breathtaking views. "It's going to be perfect," he had said. "Just you and me, starting our forever." Priya's heart ached as she realized that forever might never come. Outside the room, Rohan's family and friends gathered, their faces etched with worry. Arjun, Rohan's best friend, paced back and forth, his fists clenched in frustration. "This isn't fair," he muttered. "Rohan is the kindest person I know. He doesn't deserve this." Rohan's mother sat in a chair, her eyes red from crying, while his father tried to comfort her, though his own heart was breaking. The atmosphere was heavy with grief and fear, as everyone prayed for a miracle. Meanwhile, Priya refused to leave Rohan's side. She stayed with him through the night, talking to him, reminiscing about their happiest moments, and begging him to wake up. "Remember our first date?" she said softly. "You were so nervous you spilled coffee all over your shirt, but you still made me laugh so much that day. That's when I knew you were the one." She smiled through her tears, hoping that somewhere deep inside, Rohan could hear her. As the hours passed, Priya noticed something strange. Rohan's hand twitched slightly and his eyelids fluttered. Her heart leaped with hope. "Rohan, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice trembling. But there was no response. The doctors said it could be a reflex, but Priya refused to give up. She believed with all her heart that Rohan was still fighting, that he was trying to come back to her. Little did she know, the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that was about to unfold in their lives. The next morning, the hospital was bathed in a soft golden light, but the mood inside Rohan's room remained heavy. Priya hadn't slept a wink, her eyes swollen from crying and her body exhausted from the emotional toll. She still held Rohan's hand, her fingers intertwined with his as if her touch could somehow bridge the gap between life and death. The doctors came in for their rounds, their faces unreadable as they checked Rohan's vitals and adjusted the machines. "There's no significant change," one of them said gently. "We'll continue to monitor him closely, but you should prepare yourselves for the possibility that he may not wake up." Priya's heart sank, but she refused to let go of hope. "He's strong," she said firmly. "He'll pull through. I know he will." As the day went on, visitors came and went, friends, family, and well-wishers who offered their prayers and support. But Priya barely noticed them. Her world had narrowed down to Rohan and the faint hope that he would open his eyes and smile at her again. In the afternoon, Arjun brought her a cup of tea and sat beside her. "You need to take care of yourself too, Priya," he said softly. "Rohan wouldn't want you to fall apart." Priya nodded, but her eyes never left Rohan's face. "I just can't believe this is happening," she whispered. "We were so happy, Arjun. We had everything planned. And now, it's all slipping away." Arjun placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, but there were no words that could ease her pain. That evening, something unexpected happened. Rohan's condition suddenly worsened. The heart monitor began to beep erratically, and doctors rushed into the room, pushing Priya and Arjun aside. "We need to stabilize him," one of them shouted. Priya stood frozen in the corner, her hands covering her mouth as she watched the chaos unfold. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she felt like she was drowning in fear. "Please, God," she prayed silently, "don't take him away from me. Not yet. Not like this." After what felt like an eternity, the doctors managed to stabilize Rohan, but the look on their faces was grim. "He's not out of danger," they said. "The next few hours are crucial." Priya collapsed into a chair, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. She felt like she was living in a nightmare, one she couldn't wake up from. As she sat there, her mind drifted back to the day Rohan had proposed to her. It had been a simple, intimate moment, just the two of them on a quiet beach at sunset. Rohan had gotten down on one knee, his voice shaking with emotion as he asked her to spend the rest of her life with him. Priya had said yes, without hesitation, her heart overflowing with love and joy. Now that memory felt like a cruel reminder of what they might lose. The night stretched on, dark and endless, as Priya kept her vigil by Rohan's side. The hospital was quiet now, the only sounds being the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the occasional footsteps of a nurse passing by. Priya's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, fear, hope, despair, and love all tangled together. She couldn't imagine a life without Rohan. He was her anchor, her best friend, her everything. As she sat there, she began to talk to him again, her voice soft but filled with urgency. "Rohan, if you can hear me, please don't give up. We've come so far and we have so much left to do. Remember how we talked about growing old together? I still want that. I still want you." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Just then, something extraordinary happened. Rohan's fingers twitched, and his eyelids fluttered open for the briefest moment. Priya's breath caught in her throat. "Rohan." she whispered, leaning closer. His eyes met hers, and for a split second, she saw a flicker of recognition. But before she could say anything more, his eyes closed again, and he slipped back into unconsciousness. Priya's heart raced as she pressed the call button for the nurse. "He opened his eyes," she exclaimed. "He looked at me." The nurse checked Rohan's vitals and nodded. "That's a good sign," she said. "It means he's still fighting. But don't get your hopes up too much. He's not out of the woods yet." Priya didn't care about the warning. For the first time since the accident, she felt a glimmer of hope. Rohan was still there, still fighting. She held his hand tighter, her voice filled with determination. "I'm not giving up on you, Rohan, and I won't let you give up on yourself. We're in this together, remember?" As the hours passed, Priya continued to talk to him, sharing stories from their past and dreams for their future. She told him about the little things she loved about him, the way he laughed, the way he always knew how to make her feel better, the way he looked at her like she was the most important person in the world. By morning, the hospital was bustling with activity again. Rohan's family returned, their faces filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Priya updated them on what had happened during the night, and they all prayed together for his recovery. But as the day wore on, it became clear that Rohan's condition was still precarious. The doctors explained that while he had shown some signs of responsiveness, his body was still struggling to heal from the trauma of the accident. "We're doing everything we can," they said, "but ultimately, it's up to him." Priya felt a lump form in her throat. She knew what the doctors were implying, that Rohan's fate was no longer in their hands. It was a terrifying thought, but it also gave her a strange sense of peace. She had done everything she could. Now, all she could do was wait and hope. As she sat by Rohan's side, she made a silent promise to herself. No matter what happened, she would never forget the love they shared. It was a love that had changed her life, and it would stay with her forever. The days blurred together, each one a mix of hope and heartbreak. Priya barely left Rohan's side, surviving on cups of tea and the occasional sandwich Arjun forced her to eat. She had become a fixture in the hospital, her presence so constant that the nurses no longer questioned her being there. Rohan's family came and went, their faces growing more drawn with each passing day. His mother would often sit beside Priya, holding her hand and whispering prayers. "He's a fighter," she would say, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. "He'll come back to us." One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow through the hospital window, something changed. Rohan's breathing, which had been shallow and labored, seemed to steady. Priya noticed it immediately, her heart leaping with hope. She leaned closer, her voice soft but urgent. "Rohan, can you hear me? It's Priya. I'm here. I've always been here." For a moment there was nothing. Then, slowly, his eyelids fluttered open. This time, they stayed open. His eyes, though clouded with confusion, met hers. Priya's breath caught in her throat. "Rohan," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He blinked, his gaze focusing on her as if he were seeing her for the first time. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Priya squeezed his hand, her heart pounding. "It's okay," she said, her voice breaking. "You don't have to speak, just stay with me, okay?" Rohan's fingers tightened around hers, the faintest pressure, but it was enough to send a wave of relief through her. He was still there. He was still fighting. The doctors were called in, and they examined Rohan with cautious optimism. "This is a positive sign," one of them said. "But he's not out of danger yet. His body has been through a lot, and recovery will take time." Priya nodded, but she couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe again. Rohan was awake. He had come back to her. Over the next few hours, Rohan's condition improved slightly. He was able to respond to simple questions with nods or shakes of his head, though speaking was still difficult. Priya stayed by his side, talking to him, filling the silence with stories and memories. She told him about the wedding preparations, about how beautiful the venue looked and how excited everyone was. "We'll get there," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We'll have our fairy tale wedding just like we planned." But as the night wore on, Priya noticed something unsettling. Rohan's grip on her hand grew weaker, and his eyes began to droop with exhaustion. The doctors assured her that it was normal. His body was still healing, and he needed rest. But deep down, Priya couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She stayed awake, watching him, her heart heavy with unease. Just before dawn, Rohan's breathing became shallow again. The heart monitor began to beep erratically, and Priya's stomach dropped. "No, no, no," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not again. Please, not again." She pressed the call button frantically, her eyes never leaving Rohan's face. The doctors rushed in, but this time their efforts were in vain. Rohan's heart rate slowed, the beeps growing farther apart until they stopped altogether. Priya's world shattered. She collapsed beside Rohan's bed, her sobs echoing through the room. "No," she cried, clutching his hand. "You can't leave me, you promised. But Rohan was gone. The man she had loved with all her heart, the man she was supposed to spend the rest of her life with, was gone. The days that followed were a blur of grief and numbness. Priya moved through them like a ghost, her heart heavy with a pain she couldn't put into words. The wedding venue was canceled, the decorations packed away, and the invitations that had once brought so much joy now felt like cruel reminders of what could have been. Rohan's family tried to comfort her, but their own grief was too raw, too overwhelming. They had lost a son, a brother, a friend, and Priya had lost the love of her life. The funeral was a somber affair, attended by friends and family who had once been excited to celebrate Rohan and Priya's union. Instead, they gathered to say goodbye. Priya stood at the edge of the crowd, her eyes fixed on the photograph of Rohan that sat atop his casket. It was a picture from their engagement, his smile bright, his eyes filled with love and hope. She couldn't bring herself to look at his casket, to accept that he was really gone. In the weeks that followed, Priya struggled to find her footing. The world felt emptier without Rohan, as if the colors had faded and the sounds had dulled. She would wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for him, only to remember that he wasn't there. The pain was unbearable, but slowly, she began to find small ways to cope. She started writing letters to Rohan, pouring her heart out onto paper. She told him about her day, about the memories she cherished, about how much she missed him. It was a way to keep him close, to feel like he was still a part of her life. One day, while going through Rohan's belongings, Priya found a journal. It was filled with his thoughts, his dreams, and his love for her. On the last page he had written a letter to her, dated just a few days before the accident. Her hands trembled as she read it. "My dearest Priya, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to tell you these things myself. I want you to know that loving you has been the greatest joy of my life. You've made me a better person, and I'm so grateful for every moment we've shared. If something ever happens to me, I need you to promise me one thing. Don't stop living. Don't let my absence dim your light. You have so much love to give, and the world needs your smile. I'll always be with you, in your heart and in your memories. Forever yours, Rohan." Tears streamed down Priya's face as she read the letter over and over. It was as if Rohan had reached out to her from beyond, offering her the strength to keep going. She held the journal close to her chest, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt since the accident. Rohan's love was still with her, and it always would be. Over time, Priya began to heal. She started volunteering at a local shelter, finding solace in helping others. She planted a garden in Rohan's memory, filling it with flowers he had loved, and she kept writing letters to him, sharing her joys and sorrows, her triumphs and struggles. It was her way of keeping their love alive. Years later, on what would have been their wedding anniversary, Priya visited Rohan's grave. She placed a single rose on the headstone and sat down, her heart full of both sadness and gratitude. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I kept living, and I'll keep living for both of us." As she stood to leave, a gentle breeze swept through the cemetery, carrying with it the faint scent of Rohan's cologne. Priya smiled, her eyes filled with tears but her heart at peace. Rohan was gone, but his love would always remain, a guiding light in her life, a reminder that even in the darkest times, love endures.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.